Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? How's everybody? Happy April 1st, 2020. Happy April Fool's Day. How many April Fools are there out there? I see Tiffany Nichols. Hi, Tiffany. Hi, Joel. Joel's watching. Rachel's watching. Barnaby's watching. Hey, Barnaby, how you doing, man? Good to know you're here. Linda Crawford. Sophie. Hi, Sophie. How are you? I owe you a video for something that didn't you write me about something about, I don't know, 5-6 days ago? And if you think of it, write me again. It is April 1st, 2020. We are reading Farmer Boy today. You know, I know Allison Arngren, who came up with this wonderful idea of doing this. You know, Allison has a very special way of speaking to the Laura Ingalls Wilder community with with an edgy humor and a good sense of fun and all of that. And that's Allison's gift. She just has a way of presenting information humor and information that is, entertaining and silly and fun and all that. You just have to deal with me today because while I can be amusing at times, I don't do what Allison does. So, when I come in to read the book, I'm here to read the book and hopefully bring some heart and good feeling to it. And that's what I do. So, Allison does that too, but she adds the touch of humor to it. So anyway, you just get heart and feeling from me. Today, we are turning our attention to chapters 10 and 11 of Farmer Boy. And the two chapters are Turn of the Year and Springtime. And I love these two chapters of the book because these two chapters really typify what Laura does so well. When I say Laura, I feel like, I talk about her. We all talk about her like we know her and she's our friend. And she is our literary friend. But what Laura does so well in her books is explain the way that people lived, the things that they had to do, all the things that were necessary to simply survive. Laura writes about in her books. And the two chapters today, The Turn of the Year and Springtime, in this book are two of Laura's best chapters on the subject of farming. So it's really fun, the details she drills down on. So there are not a lot of voices in this one. There's not these two chapters. These two chapters are really about process and how farmers did what they did to grow the crops that they needed to live another year. So that's what we're reading about today. So let's start now, shall we, with Turn of the Year. Here we go. The days were growing longer, but the cold was more intense. Father said, when the days begin to lengthen, the cold begins to strengthen. At last the snow softened a little on the south and west slopes. At noon the icicles dripped. Sap was rising in the trees, and it was time to make sugar. In the cold mornings just before sunrise, Almanzo and Father set out to the maple grove. Father had a big wooden yoke on his shoulders, and Almanzo had a little yoke. From the ends of the yokes hung strips of moosewood bark with large iron hooks on them, and a big wooden bucket swung from each hook. In every maple tree, Father had bored a small hole and fitted a little wooden spout into it. Sweet maple sap was dripping from the spouts into small pails. Going from tree to tree, Almanzo emptied the sack into his big buckets. The weight hung from his shoulders, but he steadied the buckets with his hands to keep them from swinging. They were full. When they were full, he went to the great cauldron and emptied them into it. The huge cauldron hung from a pole set between two trees. Father kept a bonfire blazing under it to boil the sap. Almanzo loved trudging through the frozen wild woods. He walked on snow that had never been walked on before, and only his own tracks followed behind him. Busily he emptied the little pails into the buckets, and whenever he was thirsty, he drank some of the thin, sweet, icy cold sap. He liked to go back to the roaring fire. He poked it and saw sparks fly. He warmed his face and hands in the scorching heat and smelled the sap boiling. Then he went into the woods again. At noon, all the sap was boiling in the cauldron. Father opened the lunch pail, and Almanzo sat on the log beside him. They ate and talked. Their feet were stretched out to the fire, and a pile of logs was at their backs. All around them were snow and ice and wild woods, but they were snug and cozy. After they had eaten, Father stayed by the fire to watch the sap, but Almanzo hunted wintergreen berries. Under the snow on the south slopes, the bright red berries were ripe among their thick green leaves. Almanzo took off his mittens and pawed away the snow with his bare hands. He found the red clusters and filled his mouth full. The cold berries crunched between his teeth, gushing out their aromatic juice. Nothing else was ever so good as wintergreen berries dug out of the snow. Almanzo's clothes were covered with snow. His fingers were stiff and red with cold, but he never left the south slope until he had pawed it all over. When the sun was low behind the maple trunks, Father threw snow on the fire, and it dried in sizzles and steam. Then Father dipped the hot syrup into the buckets. He and Almanzo set their shoulders under the yokes again, and carried the buckets home. They poured the syrup into Mother's big brass kettle on the cook stove. Then Almanzo began the chores while Father fetched the rest of the syrup from the woods. After supper, the syrup was ready to sugar off. Mother ladled it into 6-quart milk pans and left it to cool. In the morning, every pan held a big cake of solid maple sugar. Mother dumped out the round golden brown cakes and stored them on the top pantry shelves. Day after day, the sap was running, and every morning Almanzo went with Father to gather and boil it. Every night, Mother sugared it off. They made all the sugar they could use the next year. Then the last boiling of syrup was not sugared off. It was stored in jugs down cellar, and that was the year's syrup. When Alice came home from school, she smelled Almanzo, and she cried out, "Oh, you've been eating wintergreen berries!" She thought it wasn't fair that she had to go to school while Almanzo gathered sap and ate wintergreen berries. She said, "Boys have all the fun." She made Almanzo promise that he wouldn't touch the south slopes along the Trout River beyond the sheep pasture. So on Saturdays, they went together to paw over those slopes. When Almanzo found a red cluster, he yelled, and when Alice found one, she squealed. And sometimes they divided, and sometimes they didn't, but they went on their hands and knees all over those south slopes, and they ate wintergreen berries all afternoon. Almanzo brought home a pailful of thick green leaves, and Alice crammed them into a big bottle. Mother filled the bottle with whiskey and set it away. That was her wintergreen flavoring for cakes and cookies. Every day, the snow was melting a little. The cedars and spruces shook it off, and it fell in blobs from the bare branches of oaks and maples and beeches. All along the walls of barns and house, the snow was pitted with water, falling from the icicles, and finally, the icicles fell, crashing. The earth showed in wet, dark patches here and there. The patches spread. Only the trodden paths were still white, and a little snow remained on the north side of buildings and wood piles. Then the winter term of school ended, and spring had come. One morning, Father drove to Malone. Before noon, he came hurrying home and shouted the news from the buggy. The New York potato buyers were in town. Royal ran to help hitch the team to the wagon. Alice and Almanzo ran to get bushel baskets from the woodshed. They rolled them bumpity-bump down the cellar stairs and began filling them with potatoes as fast as they could. They filled 2 baskets before Father drove the wagon to the kitchen porch. And here's a picture. Here they all are, down in the cellar, filling the bushel baskets with potatoes. And by the way, if you've ever been to the house in Malone, to Almanzo's house, and maybe everybody doesn't get to do this, but I can tell you that I walked down those stairs, these stairs that you see in this picture, and they are still there, and you can see where this picture was drawn, what it was based on. It's very, very cool. So let me continue. So the horses have arrived, the wagons arrived, and then the race began. Father and Royal hurried the baskets upstairs and dumped them into the wagon, and Almanzo and Alice hurried to fill more baskets faster than they were carried away. Almanzo tried to fill more baskets than Alice, but he couldn't. She worked so fast that she was turning back to the bin while her hoop skirts were still whirling the other way. When she pushed back her curls, her hands left smudges on her cheeks. Almanzo laughed at her dirty face, and she laughed at him. Look at yourself in the glass. You're dirtier than I be. They kept the baskets full. Father and Royal never had to wait. When the wagon was full, Father drove away in a hurry. It was mid-afternoon before he came back, but Royal and Almanzo and Alice filled the wagon again while he ate a cold dinner. And he hauled another load away. That night, Alice helped Royal and Almanzo do the chores. Father was not there for supper. He did not come before bedtime. Royal sat up to wait for him. Late in the night, Almanzo heard the wagon, and Royal went out to help Father curry and brush the tired horses who had done 20 miles of hauling that day. The next morning and the next, they all began loading by candlelight, and Father was gone with the first load before sunrise. On the third day, the potato train left for New York City, but all of Father's potatoes were on it. 500 bushels at $1 a bushel, he said to Mother at supper. I told you when the potatoes were cheap last fall, they'd be high in the spring. That was $500 in the bank. They were all proud of Father, who raised good potatoes and knew so well when to store them and when to sell them. That's pretty good, Mother said, beaming. They all felt happy. But later, Mother said, well, now that's off our hands. We'll start house cleaning tomorrow, bright and early. Almanzo hated house cleaning. He had to pull up carpet tacks all around the edges of miles of carpet. Then the carpets were hung on clotheslines outdoors, and he had to beat them with a long stick. When he was little, he had run under the carpets playing that they were tents. But now that he was 9 years old, he had to beat those carpets without stopping, till no more dust would come out of them. Everything in the house was moved. Everything was scrubbed and scoured and polished. All the curtains were down. All the feather beds were outdoors, airing. All the blankets and quilts were washed. From dawn till dark, Almanzo was running, pumping water, fetching wood, spreading clean straw on the scrubbed floors, and then helping to stretch the carpets over it, and then tacking all those edges down again. Days and days he spent in the cellar. He helped Royal empty the vegetable bins. They sorted out every spoiled apple and carrot and turnip and put the good ones into a few bins that Mother had scrubbed. They took down the other bins and stored them in the woodshed. They carried out crocks and jars and jugs till the cellar was almost empty. Then Mother scrubbed the walls and the floor. Royal poured water into pails of lime, and Almanzo stirred the lime till it stopped boiling and was whitewash. Then they whitewashed the whole cellar. That was fun. "Mercy on us," Mother said when they came upstairs. "Did you get as much whitewash on the cellar as you got on yourselves?" The whole cellar was fresh and clean and snow white when it dried. Mother moved her milk pans down to the scrub shelves. The butter tubs were scoured white with sand and dried in the sun. And Almanzo set them in a row on the clean cellar floor to be filled with summer's butter. Outdoors, the lilacs and the snowball bushes were in bloom. Violets and buttercups were blossoming in the green pastures. Birds were building their nests, and it was time to work in the fields. Chapter 11, Springtime. When I just, a little aside here, when I was a kid, when I was a young boy, our family has had a place in the country in California for many, many years, and I can remember doing spring cleaning, and we didn't live there year round, but we lived there during the summer times. And in spring, I can remember specifically about the rugs being taken out and the tables and the chairs and everything being scrubbed and mopped and cleaned. And most specifically, I remember the rope that got stretched between two oak trees, and we would beat these large oriental rugs that were spread along in the floors of this house. It was pretty cool. It was really a team thing. Everybody did it together, and that was really the fun of it. And the pleasure that you got from it, knowing that you had all done this work together and that you had done your best and worked hard, and when you were finished, the house sparkled. And that was really a pleasure. That was the feel-good moment of seeing it all done and look perfect and smell good and clean and all of that. It was great stuff. So if you ever get a chance, if kids ever get a chance to empty out the house and beat some carpets and mop some floors, it's a good feeling. You'll like it when the house is all nice and clean. But this is springtime now. Now breakfast was eaten before dawn, and the sun was rising beyond the dewy meadows when Almanzo drove his team from the barns. He had to stand on a box to lift the heavy collars onto the horses' shoulders and to slip the bridles over their ears. But he knew how to drive. He had learned when he was little. Father wouldn't let him touch the colts nor drive the spirited young horses, but now that he was old enough to work in the fields, he could drive the old gentle work team, Bess and Beauty. They were wise, sober mares. When they were turned out to pasture, they did not whinny and gallop like colts. They looked about them, lay down and rolled once or twice, and then fell to eating grass. When they were harnessed, they stepped sedately one behind the other over the sill of the barn door, sniffed the spring air, and waited patiently for the traces to be fastened. They were older than Almanzo, and he was going on 10. They knew how to plow without stepping on corn or making the furrows crooked. They knew how to harrow and turn at the end of the field. Almanzo would have enjoyed driving them much more if they hadn't known so much. He hitched them to the harrow. Last fall, the fields had been plowed and covered with manure. Now the lumpy soil must be harrowed. Bess and Beauty stepped out willingly, not too fast, yet fast enough to harrow well. They liked to work in the springtime after the long winter of standing in their stalls, back and forth across the field. They pulled the harrow while Almanzo walked behind it, holding the reins. At the end of the row, he turned the team around and set the harrow so that its teeth barely overlapped the strip already harrowed. Then he slapped the reins on the horses' rumps, shouted, "Get up!" and away they went again. All over the countryside, other boys were harrowing too, turning up the moist earth to the sunshine. Far to the north at St. Lawrence River was a silver streak at the edge of the sky. The woods were clouds of delicate green. Birds hopped twittering on the stone fences and squirrels frisked. Almanzo walked whistling behind his team. when he harrowed the whole field across one way, then he harrowed it across the other way. The harrow's sharp teeth combed again and again through the earth, breaking up the lumps. All the soil must be made mellow and fine and smooth. By and by, Almanzo was too hungry to whistle. He grew hungrier and hungrier. It seemed that noon would never come. He wondered how many miles he'd walked, and still the sun seemed to stand still. The shadows seemed not to change at all. He was starving. At last, the sun stood overhead. The shadows were quite gone. Almanzo harrowed another row and another, and then at last he heard the horns blowing far and near. Clear and joyful came the sound of Mother's big tin dinner horn. Bess and Beauty pricked up their ears and stepped more briskly. At the edge of the field toward the house they stopped. Almanzo unfastened the traces and looped them up, and leaving the harrow in the field, he climbed onto Beauty's broad back. He rode down to the pump house and let the horses drink. He put them in their stall, took off their bridles, and gave them their grain. A good horseman always takes care of his horses before he eats or rests. But Almanzo hurried. How good dinner was, and how he ate. Father heaped his plate again and again, and Mother smiled and gave him 2 pieces of pie. He felt better when he went back to work, but the afternoon seemed much longer than the morning. He was tired when he rode down to the barns at sunset to do the chores. At supper he was drowsy, and as soon as he had eaten, he climbed upstairs and went to bed. It was so good to stretch out on the soft bed. Before he could pull up the covers, he fell fast asleep. In just a minute, Mother's candlelight shone on the stairs, and she was calling. Another day had begun. There was no time to lose, no time to waste in rest or play. The life of the earth comes up with a rush in the springtime. All the wild seeds of weed and thistle, the sprouts of vine and bush and tree are trying to take the fields. Farmers must fight them with harrow and plow and hoe. They must plant the good seeds quickly. Almanzo was a little soldier in this great battle. From dawn till dark he worked. From dark to dawn he slept, and then he was up again and working. He harrowed the potato field till the soil was smooth and mellow, and every little sprouting weed was killed. Then he helped Royal take the seed potatoes from the bin in the cellar and cut them into pieces, leaving 2 or 3 eyes on each piece. Potato plants have blossoms and seeds, but no one knows what kind of potato will grow from a potato seed. All the potatoes of one kind that have ever been grown have come from one potato. A potato is not a seed. It is part of a potato plant's root. Cut it up and plant it. It will always make more potatoes just like itself. Every potato has several little dents in it that look like eyes, and from these eyes the little roots grow down into the soil, and little leaves push up toward the sun. They eat up the piece of potato while they are small, before they are strong enough to take their food and earth from the earth and the water, before they're strong enough to take their food from the earth and the water. That's what I meant to say. Father was marking the field. The marker was a log with a row of wooden pegs driven into it, 3.5 feet apart. One horse drew the log crosswise behind him, and the pegs made little furrows. Father marked the field lengthwise and crosswise, so the furrows made little squares. Then the planting began. Father and Royal took their hoes, and Alice and Almanzo carried pails full of pieces of potato. Almanzo went in front of Royal, and Alice went in front of Father, down the rows. At the corner of each square, where the furrows crossed, Almanzo dropped a piece of potato. He must drop it exactly in the corner, so that the rows would be straight and could be plowed. Royal covered it with dirt and patted it firm with the hoe. Behind Alice, Father covered the pieces of potato that she dropped. Planting potatoes was fun. A good smell came from the fresh earth and from the clover fields. Alice was pretty and gay, with the breeze blowing her curls and setting her hoop skirt swaying. Father was jolly, and they all talked while they worked. Almanzo and Alice tried to drop the potatoes so fast that they'd have a minute at the end of the row to look for birds' nests or chase a lizard into the stone fence. But Father and Royal were never far behind. Father said, "Hustle along there, son, hustle along." So they hustled. And when they were far enough ahead, Almanzo plucked a grass stem and made it whistle between his thumbs. Alice tried, but she could not do that. She could pucker her mouth and whistle. Royal teased her. "Whistling girls and crowing hens always come to some bad ends." Whistling girls and crowing hens always come to some bad ends. I don't think we'd ever say that today, but these are little things that were said then. So we just let that go. Back and forth across the field they went all morning, all afternoon, for 3 days. Then the potatoes were planted. Then Father sowed the grain. He sowed the field of wheat for white bread, and field of rye for rye and Injun bread, and a field of oats mixed with Canada peas to feed the horses and cows next winter. While Father sowed the grain, Almanzo followed him over the fields with Bess and Beauty, harrowing the seeds into the earth. Almanzo could not sow grain yet. He must practice a long time before he could spread the seeds evenly. That was hard to do. The heavy sack of grain hung from a strap over Father's left shoulder. As he walked, he took handfuls of grain from the sack. With a sweep of his arm and a bend of his wrist, he let the little grains fly from his fingers. The sweep of his arm kept time with his steps, and when Father finished sowing a field, every inch of ground had its evenly scattered seeds, nowhere too many or too few. Here's another picture of that operation. Father spreading the seeds. The seeds were too small to be seen on the ground, and you could not know how skillful a sower a man was till the seeds came up. Father told Almanzo about a lazy, worthless boy who was sent to sow a field. This boy did not want to work, so he poured the seeds out of his sack and went swimming. Nobody saw him. Afterward, he harrowed the field, and no one knew what he had done. But the seeds knew, and the earth knew, and when even the boy had forgotten his wickedness, they told it. Weeds took that field. When all the grain was sowed, Almanzo and Alice planted the carrots. They had sacks full of little red, round carrot seeds hanging from their shoulders, like Father's big seed sack. Father had marked the carrot field lengthwise with a marker whose teeth were only 18 inches apart. Almanzo and Alice, with the carrot seeds, went up and down the long field, straddling the little furrows. Now the weather was so warm that they could go barefooted. Their bare feet felt good in the air and the soft dirt. They dribbled the carrot seeds into the furrows with their feet, and with their feet they pushed the dirt over the seeds and pressed it down. Almanzo could see his feet, but of course Alice's were hidden under her skirts. Her hoops rounded out, and she had to pull them back and stoop to drop seeds neatly into the furrow. Almanzo asked her if she didn't want to be a boy. She said yes, she did. But then she said no, she didn't. Boys aren't pretty like girls, and they can't wear ribbons. I don't care how pretty I be, Almanzo said. I wouldn't want to wear ribbons anyhow. Well, I like to make butter, and I like to patch quilts and cook and sew and spin. And boys can't do that. But even if I be a girl, I can drop potatoes and sow carrots and drive horses as well as you can. You can't whistle on a grass stem, Almanzo said. At the end of the row, he looked at the ash tree's crumpled new leaves and asked Alice if she knew how to plant corn. She didn't, so he told her. Corn planting time is when the ash leaves are as big as squirrels' ears. How big a squirrel? Alice asked. Well, just an ordinary squirrel. Well, those leaves are as big as a baby squirrel's ears, and it isn't corn planting time. For a minute, Almanzo didn't know what to think. Then he said, "A baby squirrel isn't a squirrel, it's a kitten. But it's just as much as of a squirrel." "No, it isn't. It's a kitten. Little cats are kittens. Little foxes are kittens. Little squirrels are kittens. A kitten isn't a cat. A kitten isn't a squirrel either." "Oh," Alice said. When the ash leaves were big enough, Almanzo helped plant corn. The field had been marked with the potato marker, and Father and Royal and Almanzo planted it together. They wore bags of seed tied around their waists like aprons, and they carried hoes. At the corner of each square, where the furrows crossed, they stirred up the soil with the hoe and made a shallow hole in it, dropped 2 grains of corn into the hollow, and covered them with dirt and patted the dirt firm. Father and Royal worked fast. Their hands and their hoes made exactly the same movements every time. 3 quick slashes and a dab with the hoe, a flash of the hand, then a scoop and 2 pats with the hoe, and that hill of corn was planted. Then they made 1 quick stride forward and did it again. But Almanzo had never planted corn before. He did not handle the hoe so well. He had to trot 2 steps where Royal and Father took 1 because his legs were shorter. Father and Royal were ahead of him all the time. He could not keep up. One of them finished out his row each time so that he could start out even again, but he knew he would plant corn as fast as anybody when his legs were longer. And that's the end of springtime. I just, as I said before I started, I love these 2 chapters in the book about the process of farming. You know, we today, I mean, if you're a farmer, and there may be some farmers, people who are farmers, their parents are farmers, or they're farmers themselves out here, and so they understand that what you eat today, what you consume today, at least back in those days, what you ate today and consumed today is a result of what you did 6 months ago. And if you didn't do it 6 months ago, you wouldn't be eating today. And we take so for granted that we can just get up and drive to the grocery store, even in challenging times. We can get up and go to the grocery store and basically get what we need and bring it home and cook it and eat it. But for Almanzo and his family, they had to be out in front of this months and months ahead of when something was actually going to be used. And if they didn't do that, they wouldn't have it. That is, that's the farmer's life. And I think Laura writes about it incredibly well. So I know not a lot of laughs today. Allison and I will talk, and maybe she'll want to read to bring the laughs back into this for all of you. But I have to tell you, I love reading this material. It's so much fun. I hope you're enjoying it. And as our world continues to descend into a very challenging situation, think good thoughts for each other. Think good thoughts for everybody. Take care of yourselves. Wash your hands. Keep your social distancing. Do the things that you need to do to keep you and your family safe. This will pass. We'll get through it. Everything will be fine. But it's going to take some real effort on all of our parts to do it. And we're up for it. We're all up for it. We can do it. And we'll come out better on the other end. Thank you, Allison, for making this possible. Storytime will continue tomorrow at 1:30 Pacific Daylight Time, and Allison and I will talk about who's going to be here to do the reading, but the reading will go on. Thanks very much. Have a great night. Bye, everyone.